210917, request to consider change in lodging tax rate for the city of Homewood, requested by Peter Wright. We'll start with a report from Finance. Ms. Smith.
Yes, the committee met last week and voted 3-2 to recommend approval of a 2% increase. After discussion from Chief Ross, he included some numbers about the number of calls and the cost of those calls to the hotels in the city limits. I made the motion for the 2% increase. I was seconded by Mr. Higginbotham. And again, that was a 3-2 vote coming out of Finance.
Okay. So we have a motion from Finance.
Yes, Mr. President. I have discussed with several members of the council about the 2% increase, and frankly, after talking with several members of the council, there seems to be a consensus for it to go and increase that up to 3% for this lodging tax increase. So I would ask that the motion coming out of Finance be amended to a 3% tax increase to be placed up for vote tonight.
Well, since it's being amended, I would say that's a motion from Mr. Wright. Do we have a second on that? Second from Mr. White. So where we go from here, I think, is a reading. Mr. Kendrick?
Yes, sir. We need to read the ordinance, and I'll read it.
Amended.
If you want to take the vote on the amendment, then I'll know what ordinance to read.
Okay, we can do that.
It's just that this motion, as I understood by Mr. Wright, to amend the motion that's pending to increase the lodging tax from 8% to 9% for the city of Homewood.
Correct. The 3% increase would increase it up to 9%.
If you vote on that amendment, then I'll read the ordinance the way the amendment, whatever amendment passes.
That's perfectly okay,
There'll
sir.
need to be a unanimous consent motion and then a vote on
Gotcha.
passing.
All right. Procedurally, we want to be correct, and therefore, any questions about this? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to, I'm trying to clarify my recollection of this item, which has come before the committee several times, but I just want to make sure I remember it correctly. So the 3% would put us in line with the top cities in Jefferson County. It would put us at the equal to the highest lodging taxes, at least that we discovered. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mike.
But that would not put us above the highest.
I understand. I said
Okay.
equal to the highest that we. I was just making sure I was remembering that correctly. Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Therefore, anyone else? If there's not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay. Then let's read this, if you will, Mr. Kendrick.
Yes, it's an ordinance to provide for the levy and the assessment of a privilege or license tax in the nature of a lodging tax upon every person, firm, or corporation engaging in the business of renting or furnishing any room or rooms, lodging, or accommodation to transients in the city of Homewood, providing for the collection of the said tax and providing penalties for the violation. Be ordained by the City Council as follows. Section 1, levy of tax for the privilege of engaging and continuing within the city and the business hereinafter described there is hereby levied and assessed in addition to all other taxes of every county now imposed by law which could be collected as herein provided a privilege or license tax upon every person, firm, or corporation engaging in the business described below and the amounts to be determined below. There is hereby levied and imposed in addition to all other taxes of every kind now imposed by law, a privilege or license tax upon every person, firm, or corporation engaging in the business of renting or furnishing any room or rooms, lodging, or accommodations to transients in any hotel, motel, inn, tourist camp, tourist cabin, or other places in which rooms, lodging, or accommodation are regularly furnished to transients for a consideration and amount to be determined by the applicant of the rate of 9% of the charges of such rooms, lodging, or accommodations. Section 2, provisions of the state lodging tax statute applicable to this ordinance and taxes levied herein. This ordinance and the taxes levied herein shall be parallel to the state levy and assessment of the privilege or license tax levied by Chapter 26 of Title 40 of the Code of Alabama, subject to all terms, conditions, and definitions of the state lodging tax and set out in Chapter 26 of Title 40. Section 3, it shall be unlawful any person, firm, or corporation engaged in or continuing within the city any business for which a license or privilege tax is required by this ordinance to fail or refuse to add the price of the services rendered due by the taxpayer on account of the tax levied by this ordinance. Nor shall any person refund or offer to refund all or any part of the amounts collected or taxes under this ordinance, or to absorb such tax, or to advertise directly or indirectly the absorption or refund of taxes or any portion of the same. Any person, firm, or corporation violating the provisions of this section shall be guilty of a misdemeanor, and upon conviction shall be fined in a sum not less than $50, not more than $100, or may be imprisoned in the city jail for not more than 6 months, or both such fine and imprisonment. Section 4, the ordinance is cumulative to the general license code or taxes. This ordinance shall not be construed to repeal any of the provisions of the general license code ordinances of the cities, but shall be held to be cumulative, and the amounts of the taxes herein levied shall be in addition to the amounts of other taxes and the license tax imposed by the city by its general license code or ordinances. Section 5, the effective date. The ordinance shall become effective the first day of February 2018, and the first payment of taxes therein levied shall be due and payable on the 20th day of March 2018 and the 20th day of each month thereafter. This ordinance shall remain in full force and effect and shall apply to each month of the year 2018, beginning with the month of February, and to each month of each calendar year thereafter from year to year. Section 6, the taxes levied and assessed by this ordinance is levied and assessed in lieu of the taxes levied by ordinance 2381, previously adopted on January 19, 2009, which ordinance shall be rescinded and repealed as of the effective date of this ordinance, so as not to create a gap or lapse in the time between the taxes levied by this ordinance and the prior ordinances. Section 7, the ordinance shall be codified under Article 7 entitled Hotel Motel Tax of Chapter 6 entitled Business License Tax and Regulations, and shall replace and modify the existing Section 6-131 through Section 6-134 of the Code of Ordinances upon their effective date. Section 8, if any part of provision of this ordinance declared to be unconstitutional or invalid by any court of competent jurisdiction, the parts not declared therefore shall remain in full force and effect, not be affected by such orders.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kendrick. Chair would welcome a motion and a second for unanimous consent.
So moved. Second.
All right, motion from Mr. McCluskey, second from Mr. Gwaltney. Roll call, please.
Mr. Gwaltney?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Thames?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Higginbotham? Yes. Mr. Wolverton? Yes. Mr. McCluskey? Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Wyatt?
Yes.
Mrs. Andress?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
And Mr. Limbaugh?
Yes. So this will be ordinance 2679. Chair would welcome a motion and a second for adoption. Motion
Second.
from Mr. McCluskey, second from Mr. Wright. All right, roll call, please, ma'am.
Mr. Gwaltney?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Thames?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Higginbotham? No. Mr. Wolverton?
Yes.
Mr. McCluskey?
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Wyatt?
Yes.
Mrs. Andress?
Yes.
Mr. Wright?
Yes.
And Mr. Limbaugh?
Yes. So this passes 8-1.